I'm happy to welcome you here today to listen to some of our developers. Alan is here, Ralph is here, Nick is here, okay? And Nick's gonna help move things along on the PowerPoint. So we're gonna start off with a brief introduction of everybody, and then they're going to talk about the projects that they do, their organization, the obstacles that they face building on Long Island, and other support services that people have to offer. Get this out of the way so it doesn't land in the computer. So Peter, did you want to begin now and talk a little bit about DNF and the work and your different projects on Long Island? And then later we'll go into the obstacles. Please feel free to ask questions, and let's make it interactive so you can ask questions throughout. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Peter Flory, DNF Development. We're a Long Island-based affordable housing developer, builder, manager. We are based in Levittown, and we have a number of projects that we're working on right now. One of which is in our neighboring community of Farmingdale, and it's featured up on the screen there. This is Sterling Green. It was referenced by the mayor of Farmingdale, if you attended the breakfast session. It's the 61-unit affordable housing development in Farmingdale. It recently received its zoning and will hopefully break ground sometime towards the end of 2020. It's a mix of affordability and also contains a special needs component set aside for folks with developmental disabilities, about 15%. Which in and of itself is a challenge in terms of the funding, and we've been working, grappling with that. This was an unusual situation. Normally, the developer is required to bring the process through zoning when going through the municipality. And as many of us know, on Long Island, there are almost no communities in which there is a multifamily as of right zone, right? And if you want to do multifamily zoning, especially affordable housing on Long Island, you're going to need to do a zone change. In this instance, we were able to get the village offered to change the zone, to do it on their own motion, and to do it as an overlay. So we didn't have to take it through what often is a very lengthy process, and so that was a great advantage. I will say, however, that it was not without controversy. There was a considerable amount of opposition the night that the village voted on it. But despite that, despite the fact that there was concern raised by a number of people, it was the village board's position that this should move forward, and they passed it that very night. So Mayor Ekstrand and the rest of the Farmingdale board deserves a lot of credit for that. Just moving on. This is a project that will break ground. This is located in Bellport. Again, 100% affordable. And when we talk about affordability, we're talking about between 50 and as high as anywhere from 70 to 90% of the area median income. In this case, this is located in an area. In one of the lowest income areas on Long Island. It is an economic opportunity zone. It has been very challenged. There's a lot of vacancy, a lot of zombie homes in the area, and this is part of a whole revitalization effort in North Bellport. And here we recently, we got the zone change about a year ago, and all the funding is in place. This is a 70-unit project that we're going to be building in North Bellport. As is the case in many of the areas on western Long Island, in eastern Long Island, and particularly Suffolk County, there is a lack of sewers, and so in this instance we are building our own sewage treatment plant, even though we're being told that there will someday be a sewer coming down to the area. We didn't have time to wait for that. So, but the funding is in place for this, and we'll be moving this forward, very shortly. Just moving on quickly here. This is a project in Bayshore. We did this in conjunction with the LGBT network. It is 75 units of senior housing, along with an 8,000 square foot community LGBT center. This was funded by the state, primarily tax credits and other subsidies, again, provided by the state as well as the county. The county is a very important part of this whole process because they provide leverage that allows us to go to the state and say, look, there's a lot of support locally for these projects. Here again, it was a project that required a zone change, it required variances. That whole process took probably about 3 years for us to get underway, and that was after another developer had left the project, and they had worked on it for about 2 years. So these projects take an extremely long period of time. This is under construction right now, and we'll be finishing this up probably sometime in the latter part of 2020. We had some challenges here. This is in downtown Bayshore, which, as you know, is very near the water, and the groundwater here is at about 1 foot. So no basements. This is just a project that was also referenced earlier in the breakfast session by Mayor Fair from Valley Stream. It's a project that we completed about 2 years ago. This is a 40-unit project in an area that was previously blighted. It is right at the Gibson Boulevard train station in Valley Stream, but it's a great example of transit-oriented development where you have a project behind this building is the train platform. So it's a great example of transit-oriented development, and it is also 100% affordable. It's affordability ranging between 50 and 80% of the area median income. And this is, whoops, sorry, I need my technical expert. So what I was going to show you is the last example of what we're doing and what we've done is Highland Green, which is in Melville. It's a project that was underway for about 15 years before we took it over, and it was there it is. Okay, thank you. This was a project that was part of a larger, it was a site that was part of a larger project. That this project was not built. It was part of a lawsuits between developer in the town and ultimately the NAACP got involved. Ultimately resolved and became a 117 unit multifamily. This is a limited equity co-op, and I'm not going get into the definition of that right now, but feel free to ask me about it if you want to later. And here, this is also completed, up and running. It's a gated community, but again, affordable to households between 60 and 80% of the area median income. That means that rents, or in this case, what we call maintenance, is somewhere in the range of $1,100 to $1,500 a month. So very affordable. But as you look at it, clearly this is something that could easily be a market rate project, and that's I think all of us endeavor to these are projects that we want our residents, our communities to be proud of, and I think that's really important. Design is such an important aspect to this whole process. So I won't get into the primary problems that we're facing yet, and we'll get to that later, and I'll let my others. Thank you very much.
My technical expert over here, Ralph, is
Pretty good for someone over 40, right?
exactly. Yeah, I'm going to be 40 next year. There you go. I'm Alan Handelman, I'm Vice President of Conifer Realty. There we go. Generally, I wake up in Rochester, New York. That's where our home office is. We are builders, developers, owners, and managers of affordable housing. We've got a 4-state footprint. We're about 40 years old. We own and manage about 15,000 units of housing. We've got regional offices in New York, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, and in Long Island in Copiague. It's our footprint in New York. Red dots represent unit developments. Our primary business is affordable housing. We do a handful of mixed use and market rate housing, but what we do is affordable housing. The primary engine for what we do is the low-income housing tax credit. I'm going to run through some projects that we've done throughout our footprint, and then focus on some Long Island projects. This is a project in downtown Rochester. It was a former brownfield site right along the Genesee River. This is a project in Philadelphia. As you can see, we do a variety of different types of developments. They're all pretty much, we do a senior and family, a little bit of special needs. Everything's generally framed construction, 4 stories and less. Some adaptive reuse. This was an artist preference housing project in Rochester. Do a lot of family housing in suburban locations, as well as senior housing. In Long Island, we own and manage about, or have in the pipeline, about 1,200 units in 13 communities. This is a senior project. We've been working in Long Island for about 20 years. This is one of our first projects in East Patchogue. It's 2 phases, a little over 300 units. This was an adaptive reuse of a former law school dormitory for Hofstra in the village of Hempstead. This is Cathedral Place in North Hempstead, in Newcastle. This is an instance where this was town-owned land. They issued an RFP, and we showed up at the meeting, and it's actually where we met our architect, BHC, and the rest is history. This is a project in Copiague. It's adjacent to the train station. We work very closely with the town of Babylon in terms of rezoning the site. Windcorn Commons is in Quorum. is reuse of former UA movie complex. This is a situation where both the town and the local civic group wanted to see the area redeveloped. This is artist preference housing in downtown Riverhead. I remember going to, this is going on its own. In Riverhead, we at a town board meeting, we did the presentation. We had some preliminary meetings. There you go. And the supervisor said, I don't like your project. And I said, what? But if you made it artist preference, I think I could like it. So he sent us down the street to the arts organization there, and now it's 45 units of artist preference housing. This is a project in the village of Hempstead where we had a lot of energy and a lot of momentum going, and then there was a change in the mayor and leadership of Hempstead, and we were a little bit confounded. This is 50 units in the village of Greenport, the town of Southold. Here's the situation where the town actually reached out to us and said, we want to have affordable housing for our community. And here's a project that we're submitting next week for funding at New York State in Port Jefferson. Again, this is right across from the train station. And leave it at this. I've got some more comments about what it's like to work in Long Island as well as everywhere else.
Thank you.
Yep.
You can talk amongst yourselves. Are there any questions?
You just voted.
No, I think this was taken out.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, any of us will be happy to.
Somewhat of an odd question because there may not be an answer at this time. But as you build literally on the railroad tracks or in areas with heavy flight patterns, has there been any generic thinking as to how to not just soundproof but make those environments better since you are going where it used to not be desired?
Well, there are some requirements in terms of sound mitigation and windows for sure, and that's something that's a requirement that we add to the projects. Modern construction techniques have a lot of insulation and sound barriers, but I think the main thing is the windows and sound mitigation that we got.
Another question back
Peter,
here?
you didn't comment on financing for your project. Could you?
Yeah, I think the vast majority of the projects that you're going to hear about today are funded with combination of low-income housing tax credits, or now I think they're changing the name to affordable housing tax credits, which are called 9% credits or 4% credits, along with other subsidies, both primarily from New York State, from the State Housing Agency, from the Housing Finance Agency, or Homes and Community Renewal. The county has also been very helpful. They have infrastructure and acquisition funds available. So those are the primary sources of funding that you're going to find. There really is no other source at this point. The federal government is pretty much out of the picture as far as affordable housing is concerned right now.
Could you also comment or clarify, how did the tax reform act of 2017, may I ask, did it change the incentives for low-income housing development and the non-neighborhood, and how did it change?
So the lowering of the corporate tax rates affected the value of the credits because they were no longer as attractive to investors as they had been. So in one fell swoop, actually the day that the president was elected, the value of the credit in anticipation of that happening, of that tax change occurring, the value of the credit dropped about 15%. So that was number one. There was a positive that came out of the tax code change, which was what we call income averaging, which allows, previously the credit was set up so that it was locked in at 60% of the area median income. So projects had to be at or below 60% of the area median income, and that was it. Now what they're allowing us to do is to exceed that, but in doing so, we had to balance it out on the other side. So as long as the average is at 60% AMI, you can go up to 80% as long as you balance it out on the other side. And that encourages more of an income mix, which we think is very healthy for these projects. So there's a couple changes.
Thank you. So I'm Ralph Fasano. I'm the Director of Concern for Independent Living, and I'm going to stand because I get credit on my iWatch for standing. So our mission is pretty simple. It's to provide housing and service that enrich lives and strengthen communities. And what we pride ourselves on, what we strive for, is really to be an asset to any community that we're in. Not just helping the people that access our housing, but really strengthen communities. So we have over 350 employees. We're kind of split between New York City and Long Island at this point. We manage about 275 different sites. Some of them larger sites, many of them just houses here on Long Island, where over the years, when the federal government was involved in funding housing, we had 14 different HUD 811 supportive housing programs, and most of those were in just single-family housing where 2 to 3 people share the houses. We have about 500 units in development. It's a pretty good time to be in housing in New York State. There's a lot of funding there. It's always challenging on Long Island, so it's a good question about the funding and how things are affected. The low-income housing tax credit is the largest source of financing for affordable housing in the country. In New York State, this statistics is a little old, but I don't think it's changed much. We have 12% of the population here on Long Island. Historically, we have only accessed 4% of the funding. And part of that is because it's just so difficult to develop here. And the funding sources want us to develop more here, but they want us to do it quickly. They don't want it to take 3 or 4 years or 40 years. And you know, these are the things that we struggle with. And so it's our job as advocates, as smart growth advocates, as housing advocates, to really overcome that and to try to narrow the gap between, you know, what it can take and what it should take. And we've raised a lot of funding to do this over the years. In addition to the low-income housing tax credit, as a supportive housing provider, we have access to a number of other different sources that can really help enrich a project, make it possible, and make sure that the housing that we develop is sustainable. So just touching on a number of things, just, you know, finding sites, overcoming community opposition, raising the amount of funding that's necessary, and doing it in a timely fashion. I'm going to try to touch on some of those. So this was Liberty Village. It is Liberty Village, and essentially it's 60 units of housing for homeless veterans and their families in Amityville. And so we won a competition. There was an RFP out. When the military base closed, the town of Babylon put out an RFP, and there should be a priority for people who are homeless and need housing. We thought, like, what a great thing to use a former military base for veterans. And so we applied for it. We were named the developer. We applied for the tax credits. We got an award, and at the time, still Governor Cuomo, they were looking to do projects quickly. So when you got an award, you were expected to break ground in a limited period of time, and that period of time for this was 9 months.
So after celebrating that we got the award, we said, people started saying, well, you need a zoning change, you need approval from the US Department of HUD, you need approval from the Department of Defense. The HUD usually takes about 6 months, and then the Department of Defense will take 6 months, and it's gonna take a year and a half to get a zoning change. So after really celebrating, we were pretty depressed. And we went and we met with Senator Schumer, and he said, let's do a press conference at the site, and I have a lot more pictures of that, but not in here. He basically said, you know, this is ridiculous. You know, this can be a piece of land that can house 60 veterans and their families, and we're just locked in bureaucracy. So he said, I know the Secretary of the Department of Defense, Leon Panetta. I'm going to call him today, and we're going to get that approval in a week. And Sean Donovan is the Secretary of HUD. I recommended him to President Clinton for the position. We're going to get that approval really quickly. He had Rich Schaefer, the supervisor, by his side and said, Rich has assured me we're going to break ground on this in 9 months, that the town of Babylon's not going to hold us up. And we did. We broke ground in 9 months. So that's the kind of thing that can be done when there is a will and there is a cause that really justifies the intent. So then we did a second project, another mixed veterans and affordable housing in Ronkonkoma. And this was zoned appropriately. We tried not to find sites that are that need zoning changes, and as Peter said, it's really difficult. There's not many out there, but occasionally we do come across them. And so we were able to develop this. The very important is to get community support. So the Lake Ronkonkoma Civic Association, after some conversations and after looking at the site and having some input into the design and the operations, we did get this passed, and it's currently in operation. It replaced a vacant building that was run down. There were drugs, there was crime there, and what I hear from the people that live around here is that we certainly are an asset to the community and very much improve the area. This is a project in Middle Island, 123 units, where I'm told there were like 20 developers that have tried to develop this project. There's no sewers, so there needed to be a sewage treatment plant. The town of Brookhaven said that if you're going to do that, we want you to do a sewage treatment plant for that site and the entire community. And so that's where it fell apart for a lot of the developers. We were able to raise the $4 million to develop this site, to develop the sewage treatment plant, and to develop the site. And I don't know if Gail Bailey's here today, but I have to give her a lot of credit. She's the head of the Civic Association for Middle Island, and she got behind this project and really guided us through getting all of the approvals. This is a project that we're working on. It's under construction now in Port Jeff Station. Once again, this was zoned appropriately when we started doing it. We did run into some obstacles with the community who I felt really didn't understand what we did. And we spent a lot of time turning around the local civic, meeting with the board members, having them visit our sites. Really important that you develop the quality housing that Peter Conifer has done, that you see the pictures and bringing people out to the sites and showing how they run. There's gross misconceptions about affordable housing, about supportive housing, and it takes some time to really help bring people along. One of my favorite quotes for this, the head of the Civic Association, Sal Pitti, initially opposed the project. He didn't like it. He came, he visited our sites, we sat down for hours, we talked, went back to the next meeting, and the group was really surprised. They basically said, Sal, what's going on? Like last meeting you didn't like it, now you liked it, what happened in between? And I love what he said. He said, I have a brain, and I let new information come into it, and sometimes the new information causes me to change my mind. And I thought that was really, really brilliant. This project that we've been working on for a number of years in Hempstead, and we secured all of the funding for it. It's over $40 million. The only thing we need is a pilot payment in lieu of taxes. We offered a fairly significant amount compared to what we usually do. There was a mayoral election, and the mayor that won ran on a campaign of no pilots, no more pilots. And so we've been stuck here. I think we've made some significant progress in showing the trustees and the community that we will be an asset to this community. It's a vacant piece of land. We took the risk and we bought the land, and we basically said, you know, we're not going anywhere. There's not going to be anything else here. Our project is going to go here. And I think the message that we all need to give is we're not going away. It's not going to take 40 years, but I think when you give the message, when you cave in and you do move on to the next site, it sends a message that the people with the misconceptions can overcome us, that they can win. And I think we need to send the message. This is a project that we're working on in Southampton, and I recently went to a meeting there, and I got killed. It was just an hour and a half of just driving me into the ground. Not a single person stood up and said anything nice. And they were making me out to be a villain. Like I was the worst person in the world for wanting to do this. And you know, at the end of the meeting, I said, listen, I understand. I didn't do my job tonight. I didn't win you over. But I'm going to keep trying. And I really believe in what we do. And I really believe that you don't understand what we do. And I'm going to keep trying to help you understand. And as we were going, and then I still got blasted. And as we were walking out the door, my director of development, somebody said to her, so I guess your boss is going to throw in the towel on this one. And she says, no, you don't know him. he never throws in the towel. And I think that's the attitude that we all have, and we need to continue to have. Finally, not Long Island, but it is technically on the same island. This was a project that we had our grand opening last week in Coney Island, 135 units, block from the water, 10 blocks from the cyclone, and $69 million. Initially the town council and the city councilman, Mark Traeger, opposed us. They didn't really understand supportive housing, didn't understand what the building would be like, the affordable housing component. We took him to one of our places. He walked through. He said, "Well, this is wonderful, but it's brand new. What's it going to look like in 10 years?" I said, "It's 7 years old." And he said, "Well, how do you maintain a place like this? How do you?" He said, my area has all these NYCHA projects, and they're so poorly maintained. And I said, well, that's what we do. And part of the thing about bringing supportive housing into buildings is we not only run affordable housing, but we have staff. We have a director, we have a supervisor, we have case managers who are all in the building every day and help make sure that we do a good job. And so we're really proud of this, and it's really, if you're more interested, there's a video on our website where many of the veterans are interviewed, and you can see where they came from and what has happened here. But anyway, Mark Traeger at the opening said, this is the first building to go up in Coney Island for our revitalization, and this is something that sets the standard for everything else. He said, I'm so proud of this building, and so it's a victory to bring somebody from opposition to support. And in the video, and I'll end with this, one of the affordable tenants actually was living with her 2 kids in a shelter. She's working full time, but the kids are in the shelter. And they show her, and they show the kids, and she kind of tears up. She said, my daughter said to me, Mom, I'm so proud of you for getting us this apartment. And these kids now are living in a beautiful building. They're going to do much better in school, obviously, than living in a shelter. And I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nicholas Strakowski. I am the CEO of KOW Armor Development Consultants. I don't have a presentation for you today. We don't do the development. We assist the process. Us, along with our partner company, KOW Building Consultants, we are the ones that come in and help provide developers that may not have the staff, or banks, or property owners or anybody else with the knowledge and expertise to understand how to work through the process of development from the beginning stages and understand how to identify sites and do feasibility studies on sites and put them in touch with the right people to help them understand how sites can work and what can be built, all the way through to the end of the process. What's really nice here is we do a lot of affordable housing. And most of the work that we work on is with non-for-profits, we work with some churches, we work with some government agencies, and most of our stuff is in the boroughs. On the bank side, we are overseeing quite a few projects going on. I think we have 26 or 27 active right now. But we see a lot of different developers and how they work. We see also a lot of misconceptions with the understanding of what affordable housing is. It really does get a bad stigma. I have young kids, they are going to be growing up here, and I don't know if they're going to be able to live here with the rate that housing is going up. And I love to see great developers presenting projects like this, because as you can see, what people used to think of in affordable housing with NYCHA and other programs like that, it doesn't exist anymore. These are spectacular buildings. They are wonderful apartments for people to live in that they can afford, because it's all based on median income for the area. And it's all different levels. It's teachers, it's firefighters, it's policemen. We need to be able to have everybody afford to live here. We get involved with a lot of these developers that may not have the arms to bring on, have their own staff internally to do the construction portion. So we work with so many different types of developers and developments that we can take those best practices and help some of these smaller developers come into the showcase and be able to put up these buildings and be able to help structure and enhance our living. So we really want to provide that insight. And the nice part is we get the opportunity to provide that insight not only to developers, not only to small organizations, but we can work with cities, and we can work with towns, and we can help educate and show them, because we can step in as a party that understands the process, that understands what's going to be happening, but we don't have any other liabilities to the project. We don't have anything that's going in our pocket from a project going on other than helping to develop that. But we can help localities understand, well, it's not a big onslaught of people that are going to be coming in. It's going to be people that live here, but they're living in basement apartments. They're living in illegal structures that shouldn't be really supporting 14 people in a two-bedroom unit. So we get involved, and I'm really happy to be here and be on a panel like this with everybody here and help bring more affordable housing to Long Island. Because affordable housing brings more market rate. You're going to need more people to live in nicer houses when you have more jobs here, because there's people to fill those jobs. And it brings in commercial, and it brings in retail, and it brings in infrastructure and sewers. You're not going to have sewers in these areas if you're not going to have population to support with those sewers. So it really does, this is a really critical time for Long Island and a time for us to be able to bring more affordable housing and build up our towns and cities to support all the upcoming generations and make ourselves viable for the future. So that's what we do. If you need any assistance with a project, or if you're looking for ways to develop, we're the people that you come talk to, and we can help you structure everything and put you in touch with the right organizations and the right people to make the project successful.
I'm going to kneel. I am the state. So I am very happy to be here. My name is Michelle Schimmel. I am the Director of Community Outreach for State of New York Mortgage Agency, better known, we call it Sunny Mae. And we're a division of Homes and Community Renewal, and we work with all of you. And as you said, the state has stepped up, New York State has stepped up for our goal, which is to protect, preserve, and create affordable housing. And I am truly delighted to be with you, and it restored my soul that you are doing affordable housing, and I see the changes of the year. And I'm also thanking Sharon, our partner at LIHP, so important to our mission. So let me talk a little bit, and leave it to Eric to put me, when I first saw the list of developers, I went, what? And I called Sharon, what? But you know what, it makes sense, because someone last week, and it was in the town of North Hempstead, because I do outreach, they said, well, do you talk to developers? And I went, what? But you know what? Maybe we should be talking to developers at Sunny Mae. And this is a great opportunity, because I'm going to tell you why. So what is our mission? We have one mission. It's very simple. We have one string to our violin, and that is to make home ownership possible homeownership possible for low to moderate income New Yorkers. And when we talk about the level of affordability, we hear about 80% AMI. We go up to 115% AMI in terms of our mortgage program. So we can capture a large group of people, of working people. We recognize, Governor Cuomo recognizes that it's a little more expensive to live in certain areas, like Long Island. So we have unique mortgage programs and add-on features that make it possible for people to finally own that home. So I want to also tell you, next year, it's going to be our 50th anniversary. 50 years of putting thousands of people who otherwise do not have the resources to get into homes. So what do? We give 30-year fixed-rate mortgages at very competitive rates, low down payment requirements as low as 3%. We have down payment program, loan, you're shaking your head, 3% of the purchase price up to $15,000. We can be layered into other subsidies. We don't care about the combined load about LTC, yes. So we can be poised to put a lot of people in homes. And also we have a Remodel New York program, which allows you to finance repairs into the mortgage itself. And this is for 1 to 4 family units, co-ops, and condos. And I wanted to, it was brought up, and this is why developers? Well, we have a project set aside where you can meet with us, and before you're even finished with the building, you can set aside and guarantee that a number of homes will be financed by Sunny Mae Mortgages. So that's a great marketing tool, and you know you have a stream of people that would be eligible to fill your co-ops and condominiums. We also have another program, and I'm just gonna, because I realize time is, the Neighborhood Revitalization Program, which provides up to $20,000 subsidies for people purchasing a vacant home. And the definition of vacant is that no one's living there at the time of appraisal. So imagine another $20,000 on top of DPAL, on top of numerous subsidies that you can get. You are allowing people to get into that home at a very reasonable rate. And that is why we have been around for 50 years and get to know us. And I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
So I have a question for the panel. Now, many of you work outside of Nassau and Suffolk counties, throughout New York State, in the 5 boroughs. So let's speak a little bit about the cost of actually the delays, the purchase of the land, the carrying costs when development projects are delayed for so many years. How does that impact you? How is it different in other areas?
Thank you. I'll just start off real quick. So we do a lot of work also in New York City, and one of the, in conjunction with some of the biggest challenges we have, one of the biggest challenges we have, of course, is time and the amount of time that it takes to do these projects. And in the city, the process is very different. Number one, there are many sites in the city that are already zoned, which is very much unlike Long Island, right? Once a property is zoned in New York City, you can go straight from zoning to getting your building permits. That's not the case on Long Island. On Long Island, you have to get site plan approval, probably some variances, so that whole process takes a lot longer. Also in the city, there is a defined process that you go through when you're getting a change of zone. It's called the Uniform Land Use Review Process, ULURP. And there's a finite amount of time that process can take as you go through the different steps. It's very organized, and if there is a step which takes, if it exceeds a certain amount of time, if you're going before the borough president or city council or what have you, then it just moves on to the next stage. So I think Long Island, Long Island of course is very different. New York City has one government body essentially. Long Island has over 100. So different fiefdoms. So, you know, to coordinate that would be a big challenge, but it is something that I think we could certainly, would want to aspire to, is to help the process move along a little bit more expeditiously. It is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we face, you know, as we go through the process.
I guess one of the things is, it's this same theory that there's so many different municipalities. What I find is that what we end up doing is really managing personalities, managing town supervisor, managing planning directors, managing planning boards, town boards, fire marshals, et cetera, and it's really, that's one of the key things, is being sensitive to everyone's individual needs. Anecdotally, in working in town of Southold, I was able to get final site plan approval in about 13 months. People in the home office in Rochester said, "Why did it take so long?" People down here said, "How the hell did you do it so fast?" And the other issue is that there's a significant cost of land in Long Island. It's one thing just finding a site that is sewered and is a good candidate for development. We're competing against market rate developers who can just go through the steps. We need to get an additional local approvals, financing from the state, and finding sellers that are patient enough to wait for their money is a significant barrier and impediment.
I think it's mostly been said, but I guess what I would add is that on Long Island, the politics play a much larger role than in areas like New York City. Not that it doesn't play any role in New York City, but they play a smaller role there. And as Peter said, we don't even look at sites that need zoning changes because the amount of time. And so there's so much, all of what we do in New York City is zoned as of right. And there's still some approvals that need to be done. But the politics, the politics can work against you in New York City, but it's just not detrimental. So out here, we could have the same legislative body, the same town supervisor, the same council people, and one project can fly through because there's not a lot of community opposition. The other project will get stuck because that one project can actually affect an election. And, you know, it's a smaller level, and if there's enough people that come out, the elected officials start to look and say, listen, I'd love to support this project, but I'm not going to not get reelected over it. And I think that's the thing that I think we need to focus on out here, is taking the politics out. I think everyone agrees, you know, people here today, all of the elected officials, we need more affordable housing. And if we can figure out ways of getting land zoned appropriately, take the politics out of the decision, then we'll develop more affordable housing.
What's really encouraging to see is that you guys have all had some projects where the town has come to you with sites and said, this is what we want here, this is what we need, and opened the doors to a smooth process. And that doesn't happen enough. We work with a lot of developers. Some of them have sat in planning for 10 years plus, waiting for a site. That's carrying costs. Biggest problem with affordable housing is the margins are much tighter. These don't have a huge lucrative windfall at the end like some of the market rate projects or commercial projects. They're providing a service and a needed subsidy for affordable housing, and they're still stuck in that same process. I think as a community, living on Long Island, we have to make a better effort with our elected officials to speak as towns, to speak as neighboring towns, to work ahead of development, to understand and figure out what we want as a whole, structure that to bring developers in. There's even large cities. New York City has an economic development corporation, which is part of their political system, and they will identify sites that they want a certain type of development, and they'll put out big RFPs for these developers, and they'll bring in ancillary development around that of what they want to see. I think that's one thing that our dialogue is backwards. Developers finding a site and then having to push and fight to get what they develop there. wouldn't have to do that if we gave some opportunity and brought in what we wanted to see happen. And it's gotta be, you can't have, everyone can't be a big patchwork. Everyone can't be a big restaurant bar downtown. There's gonna have to be areas that are commercial. There's gonna have to be areas that have some industrial. And if we can work as a group and identify what areas make sense for that, it's a much more lucrative process, and we can push development to a point where our children will be able to then advance that and make just a much more structured, better process for us to live in and us to bring in what we want to see. That all have to commute to the city during the day and come back to bars and restaurants. Let's change it a little bit.
I want to talk a little bit about a challenge that Sunny May has in terms of home ownership on Long Island, but throughout the state, in terms of the diversity that we have in the state and the difference between the disparities of home ownership among those diversities. And we have been doing tremendous outreach in communities that normally aren't homeowners. But we're finding that education, financial literacy has been an impediment to home ownership, because if I grew up in Brooklyn, my family's never owned a home. It really took a lot for me to have the courage to go out. It was daunting to buy a home. So imagine if you are in a community where home ownership is not culturally, been going on for a long time. So that's why we need LIHP and other housing councils that have done a phenomenal job. But we need to step up financial literacy in the schools, in communities, to empower people that, yes, you can buy a home. Because oftentimes, I know with me, I'm a state employee, my means of personal wealth is my home. So in order to empower people towards that goal of personal wealth, we do have to have a percentage of people that want to. It's not for everyone, but to have home ownership, and that will become from financial literacy classes that we are working towards to bring up those disparities between people. Thank you.
I want to take the opportunity to thank you, Michelle and Sunny May. So in addition to the home ownership, you have ensured all of our programs, and it wouldn't happen without that. And one of the things I'd like to point out is that the amount of due diligence that gets done for us to develop a project. In order to ensure us, you look at us really closely, and you make sure that we're going to be a responsible housing project. All of the investors that come in. So we are very scrutinized, and when we put together all of this financing to be able to do it, it's a project that's been looked at very widely by a lot of experts.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
May I kind of argue back, just argue is a tough word, but this issue of attracting our kids will stay, May I just argue a little bit with that? Our kids need to go to college. Once at college, they get recruited to jobs. That's why they're moving to San Francisco, where the housing is even crazier than here. They move for the jobs. So things are a little bit turned around. I would also suggest that the whole time frame, the life cycle, you're not including that in how you're discussing. The affordable housing for the young people really needs to be for the young professionals who have jobs here, for the teachers, like you said, for the hospital workers, for all of these people. So jobs are the critical thing that bring these kinds of people. Then you build housing. So, for example, at the hub, I've suggested they have more housing than what they're permitted. They be like 1 and 2 bedrooms, so that they're really geared for young professionals without children and seniors who want to give up their homes that were built in suburbia for families with children who go to school. Because when you talk about the young people, you get communities reacting and saying, oh my God, more children, my school taxes are going to go up like crazy, we're going to have to build more facilities. You know, I'm not hearing you address the realistic life cycle of that.
So a couple of points. One is that here on Long Island, we lag way behind our neighbors in the ratio of rental housing to our overall housing stock. The percentage of rental housing that we have here on Long Island is, I think it's around 19%. And that compares to 29% in Westchester and much higher also in Connecticut and in New Jersey. So, it is difficult to attract employers when you lack affordable housing stock. But that being said, there is a lot of employment on Long Island. And what you find is that the folks that work on Long Island, many of the folks that work on Long Island, have to commute, do what we call the reverse commute from New York City, predominantly Queens and Brooklyn. So if you follow the traffic patterns, oftentimes you'll see the traffic in the mornings coming from Queens out to Long Island is worse than it is going into the city. So there is a huge need for affordable housing, and I would also argue that much of, we're 100% affordable housing builders here, but much of the affordable housing that's being built on Long Island is being built by market rate builders and developers that are including as part of their projects percentages, 10 to 20%. We'd like to see that higher, but that a lot of affordable housing is being built that way. And so, my argument is that it's really a matter of supply, and we have a lot of catching up to do if we're going to be able to compete successfully with our neighbors to the northeast and west.
So I think you raise a good point, and sometimes we talk about it as if we developed housing for young people, everyone's going to stay, all our kids are going to stay close, and that's obviously, it's not true, and that people will leave no matter what we do with housing here on Long Island. But I think the demand is such that I heard a national housing economist talk the other day, and he said basically, if we double the rate of affordable housing in this country, it will take 60 years to meet the demand. And I think, as Peter's saying, the demand is so high here, and whenever I speak and people are honest, they have a similar situation to me, where my daughter, my son-in-law, and my granddaughter live in our lower level. I used to call it the basement, but my granddaughter's down there now, so I call it the lower level. And he is a Nassau County police officer. She's finishing up college. She's going to work. They can't come close to affording housing here on Long Island. And I hear that situation over and over again. So we're not going to keep all our kids here, but I think the more housing that we have, the better the situation will be for businesses and obviously for the people that want to stay.
More questions? We got a little bit of an extension in the back. Yes.
I was just curious, I'm with Mascot Beach. I used to be the mayor there. We're trying to revitalize our downtown, which is a low-income community. With the mixed use, what will you do for the commercial property owners, for the businesses that have been there 20 to 30 years, the pizzeria owner, the guy who makes empanadas, the plumber that have been on that street? Do you incorporate them in? Do you give them some type of a discount or affordable rent or lease for the business owners? Because for us, that's an issue. They're as working class as the rest of us in Mascot Beach. So how do you deal with that?
For a long time, it's been very difficult to develop mixed-use projects because the financing simply wasn't there. That's changing now, and thanks in large part to the state, who has recognized that there is a need for mixed-use development, and they've actually incorporated into their RFPs funding mechanisms for residential projects that also contain a commercial component. So that's allowing that process to move forward, and I think now we're starting to see a lot more of that kind of mixed type of project occurring, where you can include in a lower income community a commercial tenant that might not be able to pay what the market would be. So those are some of the real positive changes.
Yeah, the state does have funding, and what we do is we implement public policy, and input like that and expressing that to your elected officials is important to changing public policy. And also one of the things we're finding is that at the zoning level, we see requirements to include commercial, particularly in downtown locations.
So we have a retail component in our Hempstead project, and we are looking at some of the local businesses that would be able to move into there. And you know, as everyone said, it is a little bit better in terms of funding, but it was at a conference on Wednesday where you know, we're trying to push the state more in terms of helping us help the local businesses, because right now they'll give us the money to you know, build the box for the retail, but oftentimes it's up to the tenant to come in and build it out. If we can have the funding to build out the retail, then we'll be able to get those businesses that you're describing and build and really have improved areas for them to work out of and have a harmony. It'll be a harmony between the housing that we develop and the small businesses. So we still have a way to go. And you know, as we're housing developers, we don't really know retail, and so it's, you know, we're taking a leap. And we know we're going to fill up the housing. We don't know that the retail is going to work. And we take a bet on that. We're willing to do that. We still need more advocacy, more help from the state.
I just want to say, one of the biggest transformations I've seen in my past life, I was an elected official, and it was in the town of North Hempstead in Newcastle, and you brought that up. I was there 20 years ago when all they had was a check cashing. Now it is a can-do attitude with working with the state that has made the change and the buy-in from the community. But that can-do attitude, if you go through Newcastle Westbury, it is transformative. But the creativity of the developers and the elected officials and the state working together has made new formations of homes with, you know, condominiums, with commercial in the same building. It is really quite remarkable. So I think creativity cannot be negated too, in terms of how the changes have come apart, and in terms of policy. As you mentioned, zoning is very important. You have to have buy-in from the government, and that's been the case in North Hempstead.
Okay, we'll take one more, I guess, or two more. Yeah. Yes.
My name is Guy Canzoneri. I run a commercial brokerage here on Long Island, and much of what we focus on is mixed-use projects, market rate developments, residential developments. We kick the bricks and try to find sites for guys like you. You know, much of the hurdles.
Let's talk afterwards.
You know, much of the hurdles that I see is which we spoke about was, and I sat on these panels where you guys are. The approval process is just so daunting. And just to give you an example, we have a project in Hicksville that we've been in contract for over a year, and the powers to be in Hicksville won't even look at a site plan until recently because of the election, right? Everything is waiting for election. There's always some other reason why these projects get pushed to the side or the approval process can't start. Meanwhile, the poor gentleman who owns the building has to deliver it vacant. He's been not renewing leases, not collecting rent. He's got a huge tax bill to cover every year. Can't pay the taxes, puts him in a bind. The guy calls me literally crying, can't cover the nut on his building because Hicksville won't start the process of the approval process. So I'm just wondering, are you seeing anything improve? I mean, I come to these every year, and we talk about the same stuff every year. Does it get better? I mean, is it getting better from your standpoint? Is the process getting faster? Are the mayors and the planning boards, are they really pushing these projects, or are they more concerned with, am I going to get reelected? You know,
I think the answer is sometimes.
Yeah, I think, you know, as housing developers, we're optimists. You can't be in this business. And so I think it gets better when people like Dick Kubek, Steve Greenfield, who are part of our community, come out in numbers greater than the numbers of people who oppose us. And that's the only way it gets better. And we need to really focus more on that. You know, I plead to all of you, when you hear about one of our projects, don't just sit home and say, boy, that would be great. It's going to be great. You know, let me have dinner. And instead of going to the civic meeting or the community board meeting or the town meeting. In order for it to get better, we have to have the numbers. And we see, you know, much credit to Vision Long Island and bringing all the elected officials here and seeing that, you know, there are numbers out there that really support what we do. Unfortunately, the numbers they see are often the people who are opposed to it.
I would say yes, it is getting better. You know, the great divide that we have in Washington I don't see that on Long Island. It is really a bipartisan effort to, especially in the downtown areas, there is definitely more interest in seeing development in those areas now than there has ever been. And so I think that's a positive, new development.
Thank you. Gentleman in the red shirt back here, you've had your arm up for a while.
Actually, this lady's had her arm up for a really long
Oh, I
time.
know.
So I just wanted to make sure she got it.
Okay. Oh, so the assistant, the helper. Your question?
Yes, I work with special needs population, and in New York State, they have a wonderful program called Self-Direction, where individuals are able to stay in their own homes, family, or just entirely independent with staff coming in. And it's a sleeper issue, but I know in my own caseload, it felt like a minor miracle to get housing for my last few people that needed it. It was people being savvy behind the scenes, using all sorts of services. I found that there was, I hate to say it, there's some discrimination as well. So I just want to, first of all, commend and thank you for considering this population. And also just wondering, on a more minute basis, how an individual would know where to apply, or what place has availability, but mostly not to complain or criticize or talk about any kind of housing scandals, just to thank you for considering this population, because they don't really have a way to advocate for themselves. They can't go out to meeting, their families are not informed, but there's such strength in people being able to remain in their own homes.
So thank you for bringing that up. I think what you bring up is really important, and what you brought up before. We have to look at the whole spectrum of populations, and one area that's really predominant is the people with special needs whose parents have taken care of them for a significant period of time, and everything worked well, but they're getting older, and so those people need to plan. I love helping people who call me. There's a whole network of people that many families don't know are there. They don't know how to access it. There are different resources, some of them are disability specific. So if for people with psychiatric disabilities, there's the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and there's local chapters, and there's people who are really committed to knowing what the resources are. And I get a lot of phone calls. I get 10 calls a week, from NAMI members, from other people. And so it really takes some time to figure out, who to reach out to, but they're out there and the resources are there. So, we have 1,500 units, and there's always a 2 or 3% vacancy rate. So there's often the thought that, we can never get in. But sometimes, it can be quick if you reach the right person. I got a call just this week, from someone who said, it was actually my doctor. I had been to the doctor, I told her what I do, and her next patient was a veteran who was losing his housing, who had a blind son. And she said, this is completely inappropriate. I'm your doctor, I'm calling you for this. And I said, no, it's not inappropriate. And I talked to him, I spoke to our director of Veterans Affairs. We're gonna house him. And it's within a couple of weeks. So it can be done, and I applaud you for the work that you do and you have done, and we just have to reach out. There's a great network, people like Eric, other associations, they know everyone that does this, and if you reach the right people, you can get some answers.
I want to thank our panelists. Great presentations with portfolios that are absolutely beautiful, services that are much needed. But the portfolios should speak to themselves about the quality of the affordable housing that's being built. And I think that would stop some of the opponents and maybe move things a little bit quicker on Long Island. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.